What's going on, guys? I'm Icy Rhythms, and this is my review for Resident Evil Remake. Resident Evil Remake is nearly 20 years old at this point and still viewed as one of the best games ever made. It's arguably the best survival horror game ever made, and for many people, it's the best Resident Evil game hands down. So, is it worthy of still being called survival horror perfection nearly 2 decades later? Let's dive in. Say whatever you want about how it was achieved, this game is still beautiful. Pre-rendered backgrounds and all, it's amazing. Haters will hate, but there won't be many. I'm still saying this is one of the best looking games you can play in 2020 when it first came out. This genre or otherwise, it's awesome, period. Every room, every hallway, every corner is just so carefully crafted for the genre. I think Mikami said that Remake is about 70% different from the original PS1 release, and it shows. There is an undeniable, a very clear jump in development and hardware between the PS1 Resident Evil games and the GameCube stuff. GameCube in general was just a beast at the time. The camera angles, man, each location that you walk into is just so well done. I think camera angles make the game, and we'll talk more about that later. But everywhere that you walk in this game offers something different, and I think quite possibly, given the visuals and the overall amazing attention to detail in the environments and the character models, this may be the most cinematic game I've ever played. But it's in the best way that you could imagine. We're not talking about tons and tons of cutscenes that take control away or hurt the player experience. It's different than that, and it's better than that. It's an awesome looking game that will never look tired or dated in some way. Remake is unbelievably gorgeous. The gameplay in Resident Evil Remake is where things get a little bit tricky. Any number of times now, Capcom has unfortunately divided the community on what they want or what they should expect from gameplay mechanics. Thankfully, this happened later in the same generation with Resident Evil 4 and not with Remake. Some of the bigger changes here over the PS1 release are exploration. We talked about the visuals, the animations, of course. Everything else that you love about survival horror games is here. You're able to choose from 2 different characters, Jill and Chris. Now, we're all familiar with these characters, and during this time, game developers used their brain and just their overall imagination a little more and thought of ways to set them apart aside from wanting to look at Jill's behind the entire time. Not that there's anything wrong with wanting to do that, because hell, I mean, it is Jill. So some of the examples that I can give are Chris has fewer item slots, and in turn, Jill, of course, has more. Jill can avoid dealing with one of the late game enemies altogether. Chris cannot. Chris, in general, is just better with weapons, but Jill is given the opportunity to play with one of the game's more powerful weapons. There are also differences in how much health they have. Jill has a lockpick, Chris has a lighter. There are many other differences that set them apart, but you get the idea. Deciding on Jill or Chris just depends on what sort of a playthrough you want to have. If you've played through the game tons of times with both characters and you have a pretty good idea on how you want to approach that playthrough, or if it's a speed run and you're going to choose based on those things alone. Yeah, I mean, if you don't like item management, if you don't like backtracking, it would be really difficult to recommend this game. I think even more difficult than it would be to recommend some of the current survival horror games that have the same or similar mechanics. A lot of the games today, for lack of a better way of putting it, lack of a better term, they just take it easy on us. And it's not even that some of that stuff is necessarily a bad thing, but developers today always show us where to go next, give us tons of hints and clues that, just might as well be the answer for some of this stuff. And thankfully, some games give us the option to turn a lot of that stuff off, but Remake is different. The developers want to challenge you in games like this, and Resident Evil Remake does just that. Coming up on a door that you can't open or a room that you can't do anything about until you have some of the late game items is my kind of fun. Wanting to pick up 2 items that you found in the same room, but all of your inventory slots are full. What do you do next? Run all the way back to the safe room and put a few items from your slots into the item box? Maybe one of your items in your current inventory is a healing item, and you think to yourself, I already have 5 or 6 healing items with more on the way, and then you can use one of those to pick up one of the items that you found in that room. A lot of that is just going to depend on play styles, how many times you've already played the game, so many different things, so many different scenarios and ways that situations like that can play out. Either way, as I said, unless you've played this game and completed it tons of times, you're still going to be doing a lot of traveling back and forth, but especially if you haven't played it tons of times. Backtracking is just a huge part of the game. I think it's what makes this game as great as it is. But to be honest, up until I started this review, I had not really played the game much since 2015, and I couldn't believe how much of this game I had forgotten. On top of the backtracking and item management, knowing how to get out of the way and dodge these zombies is very key to survival. If you're feeling like, man, I'm just going to blow through most of the early game and the mid game and use up a lot of the defense and healing items, I promise you'll struggle a lot more later, especially with the boss encounters or areas that are more compact but populated with zombies. It's crazy thinking about how you turn a corner, what weapon you're carrying, or what level your health is at can have such a huge impact on the gameplay experience. You have to learn strats to avoid zombies, period. There's just no way around it. I'm no expert, but I used to feel like I knew this game pretty well and completed it in about 2.5 hours. I was really good at this game, I like to think. Definitely no professional speedrunner status or anything, but that's because I knew what was around every corner. I knew how long to stay in an area before reaching the point like, okay, this is taking way too long. I need to reload the save or go back out the door and come back in again. It's different things like that. It can be frustrating sometimes. Very frustrating, especially if you're trying to speedrun, but it's just all part of the fun. Puzzles. Oh man, you gotta have puzzles. I love some of the puzzles in the earlier Resident Evil games. Looking back, I remember thinking to myself, man, some of these are on the tough side. And now I'm just like, yeah, 1 or 2 of these are kind of a pain in the ass, but nothing that's too challenging. But there are puzzles, and if you've never played these games before, you should be aware of that. When you first step into the mansion and begin exploring some of these areas and seeing a lot of this stuff, you're like, who the hell came up with all of this? And why the hell is this mansion so damn elaborate? It's just really great game design, some of the game's best kept secrets. It's all worth it. The puzzles, the backtracking, the exploration of this perfect game design, everything, man, including the item management. It's, the gameplay holds up after all this time.
Chris, this way.
What is this place?
Not quite your ordinary house, that's for sure.
Jill.
Barry, I heard someone talking.
Oh, you heard. I think age is starting to take its toll. Talking to myself is becoming a bad habit.
Very similar to what I said earlier in the year with my Resident Evil 2 Remake review, there have always been a lot of moving parts in these Resident Evil stories. And since the original and the remake are, of course, the setup games, these games didn't start getting crazy over the top until later in the series. And that's not to say that Resident Evil is heavily grounded in reality or anything, but I feel the earlier games do a much better job of explaining things. Some of that can require you to read some notes along the way throughout the mansion, but for the most part, it all comes together well, and a lot of this makes sense. Very early on, it doesn't take long to figure these things out. You can see that this mansion is no ordinary mansion, and remember what I said earlier about how elaborate things are. It always keeps you guessing and wondering what's going to happen next. If you've played much later games in the series and not some of the older stuff, obviously, at this point, you know that a lot of these characters are still alive, their storylines are still going, so there isn't much to spoil in the way of deaths. Oh man, the voice acting, these lines and how they're delivered, it's, Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake have definitely separated themselves from the older titles. The production values with the writing itself, the voice acting have improved significantly from the original games, but I always told myself that they were intentionally cheesy. And I feel the same way about other Mikami games like The Evil Within. I wasn't really playing these games because the stories and the writing were just, downright amazing. I was playing because I was scared, and the gameplay was so damn good. We won't even speak of absolute disasters that came after, say, Resident Evil 5, and some of you may not even like Resident Evil 5, and I'm fine with that, and I can understand why you wouldn't like Resident Evil 5. I can understand, for the small handful of you, why you wouldn't like Resident Evil 4, and I do have a review for that up on the channel as well. If they're going to remake them all up until ones that came after 5, Capcom just need to pretend anything after 5, except for 7, and hopefully 8 is really good, just doesn't exist. That, of course, is my opinion, but I know that I'm not alone. Listen, they did something really crazy with the Halloween movie series, and it worked. Halloween 2018 exists because the studio decided nothing after the original happened, and they put Michael Myers away. So Capcom can get crazy and make it look like anything after 5, except for 7 and 8, never happened. Why the hell not? That's my rant. I apologize in advance. It is now over. It's my short explanation of the story without really giving much of anything away, as I always try to do, constantly trying to improve and not spoil too many things about the story in these games. If you love survival horror games or have always wanted to try one out and you really want to be challenged, this is a true survival horror experience. Resident Evil Remake is your game. It's a masterpiece. I don't really have any complaints because I love so many of the things that other people would probably complain about. I like the cheesy voice acting. I love the item management, and I love the backtracking. It's a 10 out of 10, and I don't think the day will ever come where I think differently. Older games like the Resident Evil Remake deserve as much praise as the games today do for their attention to detail, because they found ways to make things like this work and look amazing with a lot less impressive hardware. Very talented development teams. That's all you need to know. Thank you guys for watching my review. I really do appreciate it. All the continued support. You guys seem to really like a lot of these reviews. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and maybe give my Subscribe Star link a look in the description. You guys take care. Thanks again. Have a good one.